By the fourth morning in 2 weeks, I stopped blaming age and started blaming someone in my house. My reading glasses, which I always placed on a nightstand beside the lamp and the same half-full glass of water, were sitting on the dresser again, propped against the old jewelry box that had belonged to my late wife. The bookmark of my novel had also jumped ahead from where I knew I'd stopped. I am many things, but I am not careless. I stood there with the glasses in my hand, feeling irritation cool into suspicion, then went downstairs. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and cheap coffee. My daughter Irene stood at the counter in her bathrobe, scrolling her phone even though her shift at the salon started soon. She didn't look up when I walked in. Someone was in my room again last night. I said, putting the glasses on the table between us. These moved. My book, too. Dad, we've already talked about this, she sighed, sounding more annoyed than worried. Nobody goes in your room. Then explain how my glasses walked across the room by themselves. I said, she finally met my eyes, and there was something there I couldn't quite name. Impatience, maybe, and something colder. Maybe you got up in the night and don't remember, she said. You've been really tired lately. I would remember moving my own glasses, I replied, keeping my professor voice calm and precise. For 30 years I taught law and ethics. Remembering details is my job. That's exactly what worries me, she said, softening her tone in a way that felt practiced. That you don't remember. The back door opened and my son-in-law Arthur came in, carrying the wet Florida heat on his sweat-soaked t-shirt. He grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, took a long drink, and watched us over the rim. Everything okay? He asked, in the voice of someone already in on the conversation. Dad thinks someone's been sneaking into his room again, Irene said. Not Dad thinks, I corrected. Someone has. Arthur leaned against the counter, sliding easily into his concerned family man pose. Rudolph, when did this start? He asked. Have you noticed anything else? Forgetting appointments, repeating yourself, losing track of time? My uncle's memory went like that at first. My memory is fine, I said. I know where I put my belongings. They traded a quick look most people would have missed. I'd spent decades teaching students how to read tiny shifts in expression, and that look was not concern. We've done so much for you. We just want to help, Arthur added, leaning on the word we as if I owed them. A year earlier, after a tearful phone call about debts and losing their place, I'd invited them to move in so they could save money and get back on their feet. Since then, they hadn't paid rent, hadn't repaid the money I'd lent, and somehow every conversation about problems ended with how lucky I was to have them there. A familiar heaviness rolled over me, the fog that had been creeping into my head most evenings and now most mornings. The sentences in my mind lined up neatly and then fell apart before they reached my tongue. Irene watched me with a focus that made my skin prickle, and for a heartbeat I saw something cross her face that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. Dad, you're pale, she said, touching my arm. Are you feeling all right? I pulled away. I'm fine. Maybe you should lie down for a while, Arthur said quickly. We'll handle breakfast. You've been overdoing it. I wanted to stay, to push, to demand an explanation for glasses and the book and the fog in my head, but I also recognized a losing position. Without evidence, I was just an old man accusing his only helpers of moving his things. You never walk into a courtroom with only a feeling, and the same rule applies when the jury is your own family. Maybe you're right, I said, and turned away before they could see how much my hands were shaking. As I walked back to my room, one thought pounded in my head. If they wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd have to catch it myself, and I had no idea that the way I chose to do that would show me something far worse than a pair of misplaced glasses. 2 mornings later, it happened again. Glasses on the dresser, bookmark advanced, and this time, the water in my glass looked slightly lower than I remembered. I was meticulous the night before. I had measured its position, left it exactly 2 inches from the base of the lamp. I even took a photo with my phone for reference. When I compared that photo to what I saw now, the difference was undeniable. Someone had been in my room, not just moving things accidentally, but carefully, intentionally, like they wanted me to think I was losing my mind. That was the morning I stopped investigating like a father and started investigating like a lawyer. Irene and Arthur left for work around 8 a.m., and I opened my laptop. I typed small hidden motion sensor camera into the search bar. Dozens of results appeared. Cameras small enough to hide behind objects, battery-powered, night vision capable, motion trigger recording, legal to use inside your own home. I spent an hour comparing reviews, checking angles, video quality, storage capacity. Then at 2 p.m., I drove to a Best Buy 20 minutes away, paying cash for a thumb drive-sized camera. Back home, I locked my bedroom door, unpacked the tiny device, and tested its angles. Too visible on the shelf, too dark behind the lamp, too obstructed near the books. I stood in the center of my room, scanning slowly, and my eyes landed on the picture frame on my dresser, the one with Irene at 8 years old, her front teeth missing, grass stains on her knees, smiling after I taught her to ride a bike. I remembered that moment vividly. Now I looked at it differently. The frame was thick, wood-backed, deep enough to hide something. I removed the backing, tucked the camera inside, angled it between the cardboard and the wall. From the front, it was invisible. Perfect line of sight to the nightstand, the lamp, and the water glass. From that hiding spot, my smiling daughter from years ago would now be watching the daughter standing here today. A bitter irony. That night, I left the glass of water in its usual place. I positioned my reading glasses neatly. I placed my book open to page 247, and for the first time, I left the room with a sense of purpose. I went to bed as usual, turning off the lamp, pretending nothing had changed. But that night, I didn't sleep peacefully. Some part of me, deep inside, was waiting, listening, alert. I woke before sunrise, not knowing whether I'd slept at all. I went straight to my desk, retrieved the memory card, and inserted it into my laptop. Hours of footage. Fast-forwarded. Nothing. Fast-forwarded. Nothing. Then, suddenly, motion. The door opened slowly. Someone stepped into the room with practiced silence. The figure moved toward the nightstand. My pulse began hammering before the camera even focused. And when it did, I froze. It was Irene. She was wearing her bathrobe, her hair tied loosely back. She moved like someone used to doing this. She reached into her robe pocket, pulled out a small amber bottle, opened it, tilted it over my water glass. She counted drops. Then she stirred the water with a spoon, all without changing expression. No emotion, no hesitation. 40 seconds. Then she left, closing the door softly behind her. I watched it 3 times. Then I just sat there, staring at the frozen image of my daughter poisoning her father's water, not knowing yet whether she was trying to manipulate me, harm me, or destroy me. But I knew one thing. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't stress. It wasn't forgetfulness. This was intentional. And now I had proof. But the most dangerous part was still ahead. Because now I had to pretend I knew nothing while secretly learning why my own daughter was trying to erase me piece by piece. And the next thing I discovered was worse than anything I ever imagined. I sat there staring at the paused frame of my daughter stirring poison into my glass. And in that moment, something inside me shifted permanently from disbelief to strategy, from father to investigator, from victim to prosecutor in waiting. And I knew I could not confront her. Not yet. Not without understanding everything, including why. And why was always the most dangerous question, because motive was the difference between desperation, fear, greed, or something far darker. So I made a decision. I would not stop her. Not now, not until I knew exactly how deep this went and how far she and Arthur were willing to go. And to do that, I had to let it continue, carefully, deliberately, using the poison that had been meant to weaken me as the very tool I would use to destroy their plan. So I saved the video in 3 places, one on my computer, one on a flash drive, and one in a password-protected cloud folder, then deleted the original footage in the card so they wouldn't suspect anything, and I dressed, went downstairs, and poured coffee like any confused, aging father would. And when Irene walked in, smiling too easily, asking if I had slept better, I gave her the smile she wanted to see, the one that said, "I trust you, and I think I might be losing my mind." And she nodded slowly, with a look that made my stomach twist. because she believed I was slipping and that made her dangerous. And after breakfast, when I accidentally called Arthur by the wrong name, I saw a spark of satisfaction flicker in his eyes. Just for a second, but it was there, and for the next 2 days, I let the poison keep working while I observed everything, every look, every whisper, every strange moment where my phone was face down when I never said it that way, where the water glass moved slightly again, where the bookmark shifted, just enough to push out inside my brain. But now that I knew what they were doing, I recognized something worse. This wasn't just poisoning, this was manipulation, gaslighting, psychological erosion. And I realized it wasn't meant to kill me, at least not quickly. It was meant to reshape me into something else, something they could use. And on the 5th day, while they were both at work, I collected the water from my glass into a clean plastic bottle, sealed it in a bag, and drove it 40 minutes away, not to a local lab where someone might know Irene or Arthur, but to a medical testing facility in Tampa where I paid cash for urgent 48-hour toxicology analysis. And when I got back home, I sat in my quiet kitchen with a notebook and wrote what I now believe to be true. They didn't want to kill me. They wanted to make me incompetent, legally, mentally, medically incompetent, a diagnosis that would allow them to control my finances, my house, my decisions, everything, guardianship. I wrote with shaking hand. That single word terrified me more than poison, because guardianship would strip me of legal control over my own life, and once granted, it would give them full access to sell my property, spend my savings, move me into assisted living, and isolate me from anyone who might interfere. And when I looked at it like that, everything made sense. The poison, the gaslighting, the fake concern, the memory lapses, the glasses moved, the bookmark shifted, the confusion they were manufacturing right in front of me. And I saw it clearly. I wasn't just a father to them. I was an investment, an asset to be controlled, managed, liquidated, all while making it look like they were helping. But now I had started gathering evidence, and evidence was the one thing that could destroy every lie they had built. But what I didn't yet know was just how far they had planned this, and what I discovered next would not only prove their intentions, but reveal just how cruel and calculated their betrayal truly was. 2 days later, the lab called. A woman with a calm, professional voice confirmed exactly what I already suspected, but still wasn't prepared to hear in such cold, clinical terms. Your water sample tested positive for 2 substances, she said. Zolpidem, commonly known as Ambien, and quetiapine, an antipsychotic, both in measurable doses high enough to sedate, but low enough to avoid suspicion if gradually administered. Common effects include confusion, grogginess, disrupted memory, disorientation, and signs easily mistaken for early cognitive decline. I thanked her, wrote everything down, and sat in silence. It wasn't just poisoning. It was strategic poisoning, controlled, calculated, aimed to imitate dementia. They weren't just trying to harm me. They were trying to rewrite who I was. I wasn't meant to collapse. I was meant to fade. And while I faded, they would rise. That same afternoon, I pretended to lose my keys, stalled in the kitchen as if confused, asked Irene twice if we had already had lunch. The performance came strangely easy. She watched me with a gentle, practiced concern, the kind you would show to a child or a patient, not a father. At one point, she touched my arm and said softly, "Dad, I think we should talk to a doctor. Something is changing in you." The chilling part? She sounded like she meant it. That night, I didn't drink the water. I poured it into a separate container when they weren't looking and replaced it with fresh water from the tap. Then I set my camera again. At exactly 2:41 a.m., my door opened. Irene entered, wearing the same bathrobe, moving with the same methodical silence. But this time, I watched from my desk chair, lights off, hidden in the shadowed corner near the closet, heart pounding so loud I could hear it. She didn't see me. She reached the nightstand. From her robe, she pulled the same amber bottle, the same spoon. She carefully counted drops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then stirred. She straightened the items exactly as I had left them, even positioned my glasses at just the angle I always used, as if recreating a scene rather than disturbing it. Then she quietly walked out. I didn't move for nearly a minute. I just sat there in the darkness, tried to remember how to breathe. She wasn't giving me poison. She was giving me symptoms. She was creating a patient. The next morning, I watched her in the kitchen. The way she smiled when Arthur joked about how forgetful Dad has been lately. The way she chimed in with stories of me asking what day it was twice in the same morning. The way she said she was worried about me, and how Arthur gently suggested that maybe it was time to consider options for his future. My future, as if I was no longer in it. That was when something clicked. They wanted guardianship, legal power, control over my house, my finances, my identity. They wanted to turn me into a living asset. And the only thing standing in their way was me with a working mind. But to get what they wanted, they needed me to seem incapable of making decisions. They didn't want me dead. They wanted me incompetent, replaceable, documentable. And in that moment, between the burnt coffee smell and the morning light coming into my kitchen window, I understood exactly how this would end. Not with emotion, not with confrontation, but with evidence. And soon, very soon, I would stop acting like the confused old man they wanted me to be. Because now, I was building a case, and they had no idea the trap was already set. But the next thing I recorded didn't just confirm my suspicions. It revealed something even darker. I began living two versions of myself, the one they wanted to see and the one they had no idea existed. To Irene and Arthur, I was gradually fading, slipping into confusion, getting lost in my own house, asking simple questions twice, and forgetting the names of people who had been in my life for decades. Sometimes I even called Irene by my late wife's name, letting a flicker of sadness cross my face as if I knew something was wrong, but couldn't quite grasp it. It was an act, but also it wasn't, because the truth was, even though I wasn't losing my mind, I was losing something far more painful. Trust, the kind of trust a father should have in his child. The kind that believes no matter how bad life becomes, your child would never willingly try to destroy you. That illusion was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous for them, clarity. In private, I became obsessed with documenting everything. I recorded dates, times, amount of water in a glass, number of drops she added, her exact facial expressions, her posture, even the way she looked at me during breakfast. Seemingly, searching for signs that the poison was working. Every night, the camera captured her entering quietly. Every morning, it captured me pretending to be confused. I reviewed the footage, saved it, made duplicates, uploaded it to secure drives, labeled it with timestamps. I became my own archivist of betrayal. And then came the moment I knew I had enough physical proof, but not enough psychological proof. I needed motive because in law, poison alone tells only half the story. I needed to know why, and one night, the answer finally came, but not in the way I expected. It was 11:15 p.m. I had left my bedroom door slightly open for first time, testing whether it would affect her behavior. I sat in darkness just beyond the frame of the camera, pretending to sleep while keeping my breathing slow and steady. Footsteps crept up the stairs. I recognized them immediately. Irene walked in quietly, but this time she didn't go straight to the water glass. Instead, she stood beside my bed, watching me, not moving, just staring. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. She didn't speak, didn't reach out, didn't cry. She simply watched me the way someone observes something that no longer belongs to them but soon will. And then I saw it. A tiny smile, not happy, not warm, but satisfied. A smile of someone who believed they were succeeding. That moment was more chilling than the poison she poured, because it confirmed that this wasn't just financial desperation. There was something deeper, colder, inside her now, something that believed she deserved to win after nearly a full minute. She finally turned, reached the glass, dropped 5 precise drops, stirred, straightened the glasses on the nightstand, and walked out. I didn't move until the hallway light faded. Completely, that night, I didn't sleep, not because of drugs or fear, but because of something else. Resolve. The next morning, I no longer questioned whether I would stop them. I began planning exactly how I would stop them, and not just stop them, expose them legally, permanently, with no chance of them to ever twist the narrative. I reached out to my sister, Margaret, without telling her details. I told her I might be sending her something important soon, something she must not open unless. I told her to, or something happened to me. She didn't ask questions, just said, "I'm here when you need me." But I knew that to finish this, I needed one more thing, their voices. not just their actions, but their intentions straight from their mouths. And I knew eventually they would slip. People always do when they think they've already won. And when that moment came, I would be ready because I had already placed a second camera, and this time, it wasn't in my bedroom. It was in the hallway, outside their room, and what it captured only deep in the darkness behind their plan. The hallway camera was different from the first one, positioned higher, angled toward their bedroom door, discreet, silent, perfectly placed to capture late-night conversations when they thought I was too drugged to hear. The night I first checked its footage was a turning point, not because of what I saw, but because of what I heard. It wasn't emotion, it wasn't regret, it was planning, cold, systematic planning. The recording began with a faint hum of the AC and the sound of footsteps. Then Irene's voice, sharp but hushed. "He's getting worse. He asked me today what month it was twice." Arthur replied calmly, "Good. It means the dosage is right. Just another few weeks, and he'll be showing classic early dementia signs." My breathing grew shallow as I listened. Irene shifted in the hallway. "He used to be so sharp, so precise. Do you think he knows?" "Knows what?" Arthur said, his tone irritated. "That we're helping his decline? That we're building the case to have him ruled incompetent?" "No, he thinks he's just getting old. And once we file for guardianship," Irene whispered almost nervously, "everything shifts to our name, the house, his accounts, everything." Arthur's footsteps stopped right in front of the camera. "Exactly. Debt's gone. Stress gone. New start, he'll be safe, taken care of, and we'll finally have freedom. It's mercy, really. Mercy. That word struck me like a hammer to the chest. They were destroying me and daring to call it mercy. The irony was suffocating. I watched the footage 3 times, listening to every word, every tone, every lie they told themselves to justify stealing my mind and my future. But now I had what I needed. Motive, plan, intent. Guardianship wasn't their backup plan. It was the main goal. 2 nights later, the evidence grew, this time not from hidden cameras, but from a conversation they had in the kitchen, unaware that my phone, disguised inside an old box of tea bags on the shelf, was recording. Lawyers said documentation is everything, Arthur said while I pretended to be napping on the couch. The more he seemed confused, the stronger the case. Irene's voice followed, softer but laced with tension. "Sometimes I feel guilty." Arthur didn't hesitate. "You won't when it's over, when we're not drowning in debt, when we have the house, when we have control. But what if he recovers?" Irene asked, "What if this stops working?" Silence. Then Arthur's chilling response. "Then we increased the dose." That line echoed in my head long after the recording stopped. That night I didn't sleep, not because of poison or fear, but because I had crossed the line between knowing and proving. I didn't just suspect anymore. I could prove, legally, irrefutably, that my daughter and her husband were deliberately poisoning me to build a case of mental incompetence. And with that, I turned from collecting evidence to building a prosecution. I contacted a private investigator, one with experience in financial abuse cases. I provided him with only part of the puzzle, enough to raise his curiosity, not enough to expose my full plan. A week later, his report confirmed what I already suspected: $87, 000 in debt, multiple credit cards defaulted, Arthur's hidden gambling accounts, online poker losses, payday loans, a collapsing financial life. Then one line that stood out among all: desperate individuals often justified. Unjustifiable. Now I had motive, method, and proof. But there was something else I still needed, something every courtroom values above everything else: their words, spoken not in passing, not in whispers, but in undeniable clarity, a direct, willingly spoken confession. And I knew soon that moment would come, because when people believe they've already won, that is when they speak most freely, and when they did, I would be waiting with the final piece of the trap. I knew that people reveal the truth when they feel safe, when they believe they've already won, and my job now was to make Irene and Arthur feel exactly that. So I deepened performance, slowly, methodically, deliberately, pretending to slip further away from myself. I began repeating questions I already knew the answers to. I pretended to forget the day of the week. I left the stove on and stood staring at it blankly until Irene rushed to turn it off. She exchanged a look with Arthur, one of those quiet victories they thought I didn't notice. I even forgot my bank password while Arthur watched, acting frustrated and embarrassed. Irene patted my arm and told me it was okay, that they would help take care of everything soon. They were convinced. Their confidence grew, and with it, their conversations grew bolder. On evenings when they thought I was resting early, I listened from the hallway. Sometimes I recorded from the living room where my phone, hidden in the magazines on the coffee table, picked up their voices clearly. They began openly discussing plans, how to get medical documentation, how to get a doctor confirm cognitive decline, how to file for guardianship legally. I listened to Arthur explain it to Irene like a business plan. Once guardianship is approved, he legally can't make financial decisions anymore. He said, we'll have access to everything, and we won't even need to sell right away. Guardianship, that word returned, heavy, deliberate, dangerous. I realized the poison was just a tool. The real plan was legal, official, irreversible. Strip away my rights, take control of my finances, my decisions, my future, everything, without ever pointing a weapon or lifting a hand in violence. That was a horrific elegance. They didn't need to kill me. They just needed to make the world believe I couldn't think anymore. So I didn't just collect evidence. I studied their timeline, their steps, and I realized something chilling. They weren't improvising. They were following a plan down to details, appointments, paperwork, verification, witnesses, even preparing neighbors to say I seemed confused. I needed to confirm it. So one afternoon, I pretended to wander outside and appeared disoriented, picking up my mail and acting as if I didn't know which house was mine. Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor, watched me from her porch, concerned. I could feel her watching. Irene later casually asked her to coffee, and the next day I saw them talking in the yard, Mrs. Patterson nodding sympathetically while Irene looked exhausted. I knew exactly what was happening. They were setting up witnesses, preparing to present me as mentally diminished, incapable, symptomatic. I was watching them build a legal prison for me, one where the bars would be made not of steel, but of paperwork, diagnosis, and signed forms. I waited for the moment I knew would come, and it did. One evening after dinner, I pretended to go to bed early, but left my door cracked open, just enough that hallway voices could drift in, just enough for camera inside a small decorative clock on my wall to hear clearly. Then I waited, and what I recorded that night was the final piece of truth I've been waiting for. Footsteps, and then voices. Arthur first. Confident as ever, he's ready. He said, he's confused half the time now, forgetful, disoriented. We file in 2 weeks. Irene hesitated. What if he gets better? What if he stops drinking the water? Arthur's response was cold, quiet, chilling. Then we increased the dose. There was intent, full awareness, no doubt, no misunderstanding, direct, deliberate, malicious. And that recording, more than any other, wasn't just proof of what they did. It was proof they knew exactly what they were doing. That night, I didn't sleep, but I didn't feel fear either. I felt something far stronger, control, because now I didn't just have pieces of the truth. I had the complete picture, and soon they would know how dangerous it was to underestimate someone simply because they wanted them to disappear. But the next step wasn't exposing them. It was making sure they exposed themselves legally, intentionally, permanently, right into my hands. I understood that exposing them too early would only give them time to hide, deny, or twist the truth in their favor. So I had to let their confidence grow. Let them believe their plan was working perfectly. Let them feel safe, because safety makes people careless, and careless people speak freely. So I deepened my performance even more. I started writing reminders on sticky notes and placing them on the fridge, the bathroom mirror, even inside my shoes, acting embarrassed whenever Irene found them. She would sigh and give Arthur a look that said, it's getting worse. He's slipping faster. Exactly what they wanted to believe. I began asking her simple questions like what day it was or whether I'd already eaten, and each time I pretended to be bothered by my own forgetfulness. One morning, I even pretended not to remember my bank login, asking Arthur to help me check my balance. His eyes lit up just enough to reveal how close they felt to their goal, and that day they made their biggest mistake. They started discussing filings in front of me, as if I wasn't really there anymore. We need medical verification first. Arthur said, while pretending to pour me coffee, once the doctor writes that he's cognitively impaired, guardianship is straightforward. Guardianship, that cold word again. Irene nodded. We'll need statements too, Mrs. Patterson already said she noticed confusion. Maybe we can ask the pharmacist too, since Dad keeps picking up prescriptions late. I sat there holding my cup, nodding occasionally, acting mildly lost. while inside, I was memorizing every word. That night, I set a new plan in motion, not just to capture their action, but their intentions, their voices describing exactly what they were planning to do to me. I placed my phone in the hallway, recording as they spoke in their bedroom before. Sleeping, then I used a second device hidden in a tissue box in the living room, recording their late-night conversations when they thought I was upstairs asleep under the influence of their poison. And slowly, piece by piece, they gave me everything I needed. One recording caught Irene saying, "I hate to see him like this, but once we have guardianship, at least we can get proper care for him and use the house money to clear our debts." And Arthur responded coldly, "The house, the accounts, his pension, all of it, once guardianship is approved, he legally can't make decisions about anything." At that point, it was no longer a theory. I had undeniable evidence. They were plotting to take control of my life entirely, erase my legal independence, and replace it with their names on every document, every account, every property. But I still needed one thing, the moment where they would openly admit not just what they were doing, but why, a direct confession of motive, greed, desperation, and intent, something that would leave them no room to argue, deny, or escape through technicality. And that moment came sooner than expected. One evening, I pretended to go to bed early, leaving my door slightly open, letting the dim hallway light spill into my room just enough that they could believe I was deeply asleep, my breathing slow, my room quiet. Then it happened, Irene's soft voice full of fear. "Arthur, can't we wait a little longer? He's still my father." And then Arthur's sharp reply, "He stopped being just your father when we started drowning in debt. This is survival. We're doing what we have to do, and he will never know." And then the sentence that sealed their fate. In a few weeks, he won't own anything, not even his own name. I stopped the recording, feeling more awake than I had in months, because now I didn't just have footage. I didn't just have lab reports. I had the truth spoken aloud, willingly, intentionally, and without remorse. And that was the moment I knew this story would not end in confusion. It would end in court. It would end with justice, and I would make sure they watched it happen. I knew that gathering evidence was no longer enough. Now I had to protect it, secure it, duplicate it, and make sure no matter what happened to me, the truth would survive. So the next morning, after Irene and Arthur left for work, I copied every video, audio recording, lab report, and note onto multiple flash drives, labeling each one under harmless names like Photo Archive and Old Documents. Then I placed one in my desk drawer, one in my car's glove compartment, and one inside the lining of an old jacket hanging in the guest room closet. But I still needed one more layer, someone else to know, someone trustworthy, someone they could never reach. And that person was my sister, Margaret. I called her and told her I was sending her something very important, that if anything happened to me, anything at all, she had to take that envelope straight to police. She didn't ask for explanations. She just said, "I'll protect it, I promise." And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to safety, but I still couldn't rest because I knew to win this, I didn't just need to prove what they were doing. I needed to prove why motive, greed, financial desperation, guardianship intent, all of it. And I couldn't get that just through video. I needed documentation. So I hired a private investigator recommended by an attorney I trusted. His name was James Mitchell, quiet, older, experienced in financial fraud cases. He listened to everything without interrupting, then simply said, "Give me 10 days. He found everything I hoped he would, and everything I feared he would. He uncovered their credit card debt, their online gambling losses, the collections agencies chasing them, the hidden payday loans, and even copies of emails where Arthur researched how to prove mental incompetence in elderly family members. But the most powerful discovery was this. He printed out forms Arthur had downloaded from a legal website, the forms necessary to file for guardianship, naming himself and Irene as the proposed legal guardians for me. That single piece of paper was chilling, because it showed they weren't just thinking about it. They were preparing to do it legally, officially, permanently. Once approved, they would have complete control over my finances, my house, my medical decisions, even where I lived. They could put me in a nursing home against my will and sell everything I owned. I held those forms in my hand like a weapon, because that's what they were. Silent weapons meant to erase me without force, without violence, without blood. That day, something changed in me. I was no longer just defending myself. I was preparing for war, a legal war One I fully intended to win, but now, to win flawlessly, I needed help from someone who understood the battlefield. So I made an appointment with a lawyer specializing in elder abuse and financial exploitation cases. His name was Daniel Prescott, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who didn't waste time on shock or sympathy when I finished showing him all the evidence. He closed the folder, looked at me steadily, and said, "Mister Collins, this isn't just abuse. This is attempted legal annihilation." He leaned forward. "Elder abuse is not just about violence. It's about control, financial manipulation, and forced incompetence. What they're doing is one of the most sophisticated forms of exploitation, and you have gathered some of the strongest evidence I've ever seen." I nodded slowly, then said the one sentence I've been carrying inside me since the night I saw my daughter pour poison into my water. I don't just want to stop them. I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone else. He looked at me for a moment, then said words I will never forget. "Then let's build this case so perfectly that they walk right into it themselves." And I realized this wasn't just survival anymore. It was justice, real justice. And justice was coming for them, slowly, quietly, and inevitably, just like they thought poison was coming for me. Prescott helped me structure everything like a prosecution case, not just scattered screenshots and videos, but a timeline, a narrative, a clear legal strategy. He had me print dates, document symptoms, attach lab reports, and include every instance of poisoning, every recording, every moment of manipulation. We cataloged the footage where Irene stirred my water, the hallway audio where Arthur said. Then we increased the dose, and the chilling clip where they discussed guardianship as if they were discussing weekend plans. We added the investigator's financial report, proof of gambling debt, loan defaults, and the downloaded guardianship forms with my name already written in. Soon it wasn't just a collection of evidence. It was a case file, so strong, so complete, that no judge could possibly ignore it. Prescott then did something I hadn't expected. He told me to keep acting, to keep drinking the poisoned water, and to keep letting them believe they were winning. I hesitated, even though I had been faking most of the weakness lately. The truth was those drugs were still affecting me, the dizziness, the morning fog, the headache that never fully went away. He looked me in the eye and said, "Mr. Collins, if we stop now, they'll get suspicious. And suspicion makes people careful right now. They think they're safe." He paused. "We need them comfortable, bold, and confident when they file that petition. That's when we strike." So I agreed, not because I wanted to, but because I finally understood the difference between surviving and winning. Surviving is quiet, hidden, careful, but winning requires timing, precision, patience, and sometimes sacrifice. Over the next 2 weeks, I perfected performance. I pretended to forget birthdays. I lost my wallet twice. I let Irene remind me to take imaginary medicine. I asked Arthur if he could help me organize my finances because things were too confusing now. And that moment, his eyes lit up so bright, I thought he might actually shake my hand for making it so easy. It was during one of those stage confusion moments that he finally said it, casually, smoothly. "Dad, maybe it's time for some legal help. I mean, someone to help manage things. We're here, we could help." Guardianship, spoken aloud, openly, with no hesitation. That conversation got recorded, printed, transcribed, time-stamped, filed. From that point on, things moved faster than I expected. One morning, I overheard Irene in the kitchen saying, "The doctor appointment is in 2 weeks. Once I get a cognitive report, we can file." And Arthur replied, "Perfect, by mid-May, it'll all be official. He won't even know what's happening." I nearly laughed, because while they were preparing to file against me, Prescott and I were preparing something far more devastating. We had already filed a sealed protective petition, one that would automatically connect to their guardianship filing once submitted, meaning the moment they walked into court to take everything from me, they would instead be walking into a trap, sealed with their own signatures. I didn't need confrontation. I didn't need shouting. I just needed them to follow their plan, to believe they were in control, and they did. They believed it completely, and that belief made them blind. That night when I went to bed, I looked at the water glass on my nightstand, clear, calm, deadly, and I felt no fear, because I knew something that didn't poison might silence a man, but truth can destroy the ones who try to bury it. And in a few weeks, I wouldn't just prove what they did, I would make sure the world knew exactly how and why they did it. My only job left now was simple: keep pretending, keep recording, and wait for the knock on the door that would change everything. 1 week later, Irene walked into my room in the morning with papers in her hand, smiling with that careful sweetness she used when pretending to care. "Dad, we scheduled an appointment with DR. Reynolds next Thursday," she said gently. "He'll help evaluate what's going on with your memory. We're just trying to keep you safe." I nodded slowly, staring at her like I was trying to place her face, like her name had almost slipped away. She squeezed my hand and said, "Don't worry. We're here to take care of you." That sentence would have sounded comforting from another mouth, from another daughter, but from her, it was a strategic declaration, a step in her legal takeover of my life. The night before the appointment, I left my bedroom door slightly open and placed my phone behind the hallway bookshelf, recording around midnight. I heard footsteps, then voices. Arthur whispered, "Once the doctor writes cognitive impairment, we have everything. And after that, guardianship is practically guaranteed." Irene responded softly, "He's almost there already. I don't even recognize him anymore. It's like he's fading." And then came the line that was both cruel and revealing. "He's becoming exactly what we need him to be." They didn't know those words would later sit in a courtroom, played back for a judge, recorded clearly, sharp enough to cut through every lie. The doctor's visit was staged perfectly. We planned it with precision. I didn't act incompetent or confused. I acted almost competent, fumbling slightly, hesitating, forgetting the date, misremembering President's name, enough to raise small concern, not enough to seem fake. DR. Reynolds, unaware of what was happening, noted mild cognitive decline and recommended further neurological testing. For Irene and Arthur, that was victory. But for me and Prescott, it was evidence, another piece of their carefully curated narrative of my decline. Once we got home, they celebrated quietly. I saw in the way they looked at each other, satisfied, relieved, confident. That afternoon, I sat in my room, holding the new medical note in my hands, and I whispered to myself, "This is the last piece." 2 days later, I received a notification from Prescott. They're filing next week. Be ready. Guardianship petition. Control of all assets. Legal declaration of my incompetence. Their signatures. Their request to own the rights to my life. And they had no idea that their own filing would trigger mine. Automatically, silently, decisively. The day they filed, Prescott called. "It's done." Hearing scheduled for May 28th. And just like that, their plan was in motion, but so was mine now. I no longer needed pretend. I no longer needed to sip poison water or fake confusion. Because now, everything had been set in motion by their own hands. They had built the very case that would destroy them. And they didn't even see it coming, but I still had one more role to play, the final act in their twisted performance. I had to go to court looking like the man they thought they had weakened, quiet, slow, fragile. But when I walked into that courtroom, I would not walk in as their victim. I would walk in as their witness, their evidence, and their consequence. And they wouldn't understand that until it was far too late. Because by the time they realized what was happening, the judge would already be pressing play on the first video. And everything they thought was working in silence would echo loudly in front of the law. And that was when they would finally understand what it truly meant to underestimate someone who wasn't losing his mind, but quietly building his case. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and cold air as I arrived 15 minutes early, deliberately walking a little slower than usual, letting my steps seem unsure, controlled, calculated, exactly what they expected to see from a man they believed was slipping away. Irene stood near the hallway with Arthur and their lawyer, both dressed too nicely, wearing expressions of concern and forced sadness, pretending to be the caring family petitioning for guardianship out of love. But when Irene saw me walking confidently beside Prescott, her eyes flickered with something I recognized instantly, confusion, followed by unease. Arthur's jaw tightened. He had expected him to show up alone, maybe even lost, but instead I arrived accompanied by a lawyer holding a black case containing every lie they had built, and the moment I sat down across from them, I said nothing, just watched them, studied the panic quietly growing in their faces. Their attorney glanced between us, and sensed something was deeply wrong. "Why does he have counsel?" he whispered to Arthur. But Arthur didn't answer, because even he didn't fully know. The judge, a composed woman with sharp eyes named Judge Morrison, entered and began reviewing their petition. It described me as fragile, mentally declining, unable to manage my life or finances. needing care and guardianship for protection. Then she lifted a second folder with a different seal. "There's a related emergency protective filing associated with this case," she said, looking at Irene and Arthur. "Filed privately on your behalf, Mr. Collins." Both of them stiffened. I looked directly at Irene, and for the first time in months, I didn't pretend to be confused. Instead, I let clarity settle in my gaze like a verdict. Morrison continued. "Given the contents of both petitions, the court has elected to review all materials together." That was when Prescott stood, turned on the court monitor, and pressed play. Silence fell like a weight. The courtroom screen showed my bedroom, time-stamped, dimly lit. And then Irene entered, moving quietly, opening a small bottle, dropping medication into my water, stirring it. The silence was suffocating. Not a sound from anyone. Then the second video, then the third, Irene standing over my sleeping form, focused, deliberate, unshaken. The judge's expression hardened. Then Prescott played the hallway audio. Arthur's voice filled the room. "Once we get guardianship, everything is ours. If he doesn't decline fast enough, we increase the dose." Irene's voice followed, trembling slightly. "But he's my father," and Arthur's cold reply, "Not anymore. This is survival." Irene looked like she might collapse. Arthur tried to stand, but the bailiff warned him to sit. Their attorney looked pale, sweating, already defeated. There was no argument for what they saw and heard. It was undeniable, deliberate, and documented. "Mr. Collins," the judge said, "do you have anything further to present?" I stood slowly, deliberately, and said just one sentence. Calm, steady, powerful. I was never losing my mind. I was collecting proof. In that moment, something broke in both of them. Arthur stared straight ahead, empty, expressionless. Irene's tears began silently, not like guilt, but like someone watching their world collapse piece by piece. The judge denied their guardianship petition immediately, issued a protective order, blocked them from my home, my finances, and most importantly, from me. Then she paused and said the words I had waited months to hear. "Based on this evidence, I am referring this matter to criminal investigation for elder abuse, financial exploitation, and attempted incapacitation for illegal gain." That was when Arthur finally looked afraid, truly afraid, because now, this wasn't a family issue anymore. This was criminal. It was over. But the next chapter, justice, that had only just begun. 2 weeks after the court hearing, everything changed publicly. The case that once lived only in hidden cameras, whispered hallway conversations, and secret intentions was now in the hands of prosecutors, reporters, and law enforcement. Arthur and Irene were both formally charged with attempted aggravated battery, elder financial exploitation, and intent to unlawfully obtain guardianship. They were arrested at their apartment on a Wednesday morning. I didn't witness it, but I didn't have to. Prescott's investigator recorded it from a distance. Arthur tried to argue with the officers, claiming misunderstanding, but Irene said nothing. She didn't resist, didn't plead, didn't speak. She just lowered her head and walked. Their mugshots went online that same day. The headlines spread across local news faster than I anticipated. Sarasota couple arrested for poisoning father to take control of assets. Within 2 days, it was picked up nationally. Then internationally. My house became strangely quiet. Not heavy, not haunted, but peaceful. The type of silence that comes after a long storm finally breaks. I spent the next few days clearing their belongings, repainting the room they once occupied, removing every trace of their presence. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. Healing requires removal. Their trial was scheduled, but later converted to a plea agreement. Their attorney advised them that with surveillance videos, lab-confirmed toxic substances, medical reports, digital filings, debt motives, and their own voices, there was no viable defense. The evidence was not just strong, it was irrefutable. They took the deal to avoid prison. They accepted 5 years probation, 500 hours community service at elder care centers, mandatory psychological counseling, permanent no-contact order, and restitution of $500 per month for 10 years. They would not go to prison, but they would live with their crime every single day. And more importantly, the world now knew the truth. They weren't caregivers. They weren't protectors. They were predators. And I wasn't just a victim. I had become the witness. One afternoon, I sat in my living room, sunlight warming the floor, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. Margaret visited, bringing basil, books, and normalcy. She looked at me and said, "You were right to trust the law, even when it felt like you couldn't trust anything else." I nodded slowly, because that's what this had become, not just a story of betrayal, but a demonstration of what truth could do when protected, preserved, and presented at the right moment. I didn't forgive them. Not that day. Maybe not ever. But I did understand something. Evil does not always come roaring with violence. Sometimes it walks quietly, carefully, pretending to care, while it slowly tries to erase you. And justice doesn't always arrive with fury. Sometimes it arrives quietly too, calm, steady, undeniable, like pressing play in a courtroom. A month later, I stood in a community hall teaching a class on elder protection, financial awareness, and manipulation tactics. 27 people attended, some scared, some angry, some quietly grateful that someone understood. They took notes. They asked questions. And I told them one thing clearly: document everything. Because lies can pretend to be truth, but truth, when protected, never pretends. Truth waits, and when the time is right, it speaks. And that was how I decided to move forward. Not with revenge, not with bitterness, but with purpose. Because evil hoped I would fade quietly. Instead, I chose to speak loudly. And I wasn't done speaking yet. But what happened 1 month later, I never could have expected. 1 month later, I received a letter, not from the court, not from the prosecutors, from Irene. It came through Prescott's office because of the no-contact order. He asked if I wanted to read it. I hesitated. Then I said yes. It was handwritten, shaky, uncertain. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to justify anything. She simply wrote, "I don't know how to live with what I did. I see your face every night before I sleep. Not the weakened one. The one that knew. The one that looked at me in court without anger, just truth. I didn't lose you slowly. I threw you away. And now I live with empty hands." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it and set it aside. I felt no satisfaction, no relief, just a quiet understanding that consequences lived longer than punishment. Later that week, the Sarasota Herald-Tribune published a follow-up story about my case. Not about Irene and Arthur, about me, about how a retired law professor, targeted with legal incapacitation, built a case quietly while appearing to decline. They called it the case that prosecuted itself. They asked if I wanted to comment. I agreed. I didn't talk about betrayal. I didn't talk about revenge. I talked about awareness, about how the most dangerous kind of abuse isn't loud. It's quiet, careful, disguised as concern. I ended with a line I didn't plan but spoke without thinking. Sometimes they don't try to kill you. They try to erase you. That line ended up everywhere. Podcasts, articles, even legal seminars. Within weeks, I was invited to speak to elder law groups, advocacy forums, and financial safety workshops. Each time, I stood in front of strangers who had their own stories, some with scars, some with documents, some with nothing but suspicions, and I spoke. Not about what was taken from me, but about what I protected. My name, my mind, my truth. Life began returning to normal, not the old normal, but a new kind. One where I made coffee without checking cameras, where I watered the garden slowly, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to, where I slept with my door unlocked, not because I forgot, but because I finally trusted the silence. Margaret visited often. We rebuilt family in a gentler, slower way, not with big gestures, but with small consistencies. A pot of tea, old music, lemon cookies baked too long, but still good. I didn't forgive Irene, but I didn't hate her either. Hate keeps you tethered. I wanted to be free. I let justice do its job and let time do the rest. Then, on a quiet morning, sitting on my back porch with the sunlight spilling across my feet and a cup of coffee warm in my hands, it happened. Not in a dramatic moment, not with tears or anger, just a whisper of truth, quiet and certain. I had survived. Not just physically, not just legally, but emotionally. Betrayal didn't finish me. It revealed me. It didn't erase who I was. It reminded me why I must never let anyone else do it again. And that was the moment I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Because sometimes the end isn't the last chapter. Sometimes it's the first chapter of who you become next. But there was still one more unexpected twist waiting, one I never saw coming. Months passed quietly, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel hollow but peaceful, like a room finally emptied of echoes. The legal cases were closed, restitution payment had begun, and though I never responded to Irene's letter, I sometimes wondered if silence was the only answer some people deserve. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is loud, but healing is quiet. I chose quiet. One morning, I received an invitation from a community legal center in Tampa. They wanted me to speak, not just to seniors, but to law students, social workers, and future guardianship attorneys. Your story, the letter said, is not just about protection. It's about prevention. I accepted. 2 weeks later, I stood on a small stage in a modest auditorium, facing young faces, eager, hopeful, unaware of what real betrayal could look like. I didn't speak like a victim. I spoke like a witness to how easily love can disguise control, how kindness can camouflage manipulation, and how guardianship, meant to protect, can be twisted into a silent weapon. When I described how Irene had stirred the water, how she smiled at me while quietly erasing my identity, the room fell silent. Not shocked, not horrified, thinking, learning, understanding. At the end, I said something I never planned to say. My daughter didn't poison me because she hated me. She poisoned me because she convinced herself it wasn't evil, just necessary. It wasn't a justification. It was a warning. After the seminar, a young woman approached me. She looked nervous, holding papers close to her chest. "Sir," she said quietly, "I work in elder assessment. I think I've seen cases like yours, maybe not as extreme, but close. I never knew what to look for. Now I do." That moment mattered, more than any courtroom victory. Because justice isn't always about what you win. It's about what you prevent from happening again. I left the building feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace wrapped in purpose. That night, I sat on my porch, sipping tea, watching the garden sway gently in the warm air. I thought of Irene, not the woman who betrayed me, but the little girl on the bicycle, scraped knees, missing teeth, laughing because she trusted me to help her up when she fell. I couldn't get that girl back, but I could make sure her mistake never became someone else's story. I didn't forgive her, but I no longer needed to, because healing is not about fixing what broke. It's about growing something new in its place. I closed my eyes and breathed, not the tired, confused breaths they once wanted me to take, but a strong, steady breath, one that belonged to a man who was never losing his mind, only waiting for the truth to wake up. If you believe truth always finds a way, share this story, subscribe for more, and tell me, what would you have done in my place?